In the ancient world, beyond the reach of modern civilization's comforts, there was a land forged by courage and discipline, a land called Sparta. In this harsh land, boys were trained from the earliest age to become warriors. Every day was a test of strength and will, every night a lesson in survival. It was here that Leonidas, the son of King Xerxes, grew into a man whose name would echo through the ages. Leonidas was not born to be king. He was the younger son, destined, so it seemed, to walk in the shadow of his elder brother. Yet fate, with its unpredictable hand, would call upon Leonidas in a time of great peril. When his brother died without an heir, Leonidas ascended to the throne, becoming the king of Sparta, a kingdom whose might lay not just in its armies, but in the unbreakable spirit of its people. The world Leonidas inherited was under threat. To the east, across the Aegean Sea, rose the mightiest empire the world had ever known, Persia. Under the rule of King Xerxes, the Persian Empire stretched from the banks of the Indus to the shores of the Mediterranean, swallowing up kingdoms and peoples with relentless force. Now, Xerxes set his sights on Greece, a collection of fiercely independent city-states, often at odds with each other, but united by a love of freedom and a hatred of tyranny. Word reached Sparta that Xerxes was marching westward, his army numbering in the hundreds of thousands, perhaps even 1 million strong. The earth trembled beneath the feet of his soldiers, the seas darkened with the sails of his navy. Greece, Leonidas knew, would soon face extinction unless its people stood together. In the summer of 480 BCE, representatives from across Greece gathered at Corinth. There, they debated and argued, as Greeks were wont to do, but finally agreed they would resist. Sparta, as the most feared military power, would take command of the defense. But the timing was ill-fated. The sacred festival of Carneia was upon the Spartans, and their laws forbade them from going to war during this holy period. Yet the Persians would not wait. The pass at Thermopylae, the hot gates, was the chosen spot for defense. It was a narrow road squeezed between the mountains and the sea, so tight that only a few men could fight at a time. Here, the Persian advantage in numbers would count for little. Leonidas volunteered to lead the defense. Knowing the laws of Sparta, knowing he could not take the full army, he chose instead a company of 300 men, his personal bodyguard, each one a father to ensure that Sparta's legacy would live on, even if they fell. These 300 Spartans were not alone. They were joined by a few thousand allies from other Greek city-states, Thespians, Thebans, and others who shared their resolve. As the Greek force marched north, rumors spread of the Persian host, so vast, it was said, that they drank rivers dry and blotted out the sun with their arrows. But the men who followed Leonidas were not deterred. They passed through villages emptied by fear, through landscapes scarred by war. At last, they reached the narrow defile of Thermopylae. The Greeks set to work, repairing an old wall that blocked the pass, preparing their defenses. Each man knew what was coming, and yet their resolve did not waver. Leonidas walked among them, his presence calm and steady, a living embodiment of Spartan discipline. His words were few, but his gaze told them everything. They would not yield. Soon the Persian scouts appeared, their banners fluttering in the wind, their armor glinting in the sun. They returned to Xerxes with tales of the Greeks, of men combing their hair and oiling their bodies, as if preparing for a festival rather than a last stand. Xerxes, at first, could not believe it. He sent envoys, demanding that the Greeks lay down their arms. Leonidas' answer was simple and immortal. Come and take them. The sun rose on the first day of battle. The Persian army advanced, wave upon wave, but the narrow pass negated their numbers. The Greeks fought in tight formation, the phalanx, a wall of shields and spears, every man protected by his neighbor. The Persians hurled themselves at the line, but the Spartans and their allies held firm, their discipline unbreakable. For hour after hour, the slaughter continued. Persian soldiers fell in heaps, their bodies clogging the pass. The king grew furious and sent in his elite warriors, the Immortals. But even they could not break the Greek line. On the second day, Xerxes tried again, sending his troops in fresh assaults, but the result was the same. The Greeks fought with unmatched ferocity, and the Persians could not prevail. It seemed as if the gods themselves favored the defenders of the Thermopylae, but fate, as always, had another turn in store. Among the locals was a man named Ephialtes, whose name would become synonymous with treachery. Desiring reward from Xerxes, he revealed to the Persians a secret path through the mountains, a trail that would allow the Persians to outflank the Greek position. Xerxes seized the opportunity, sending his troops through the night to encircle the Greeks. At dawn on the third day, word reached Leonidas of the betrayal. The Persians were approaching from the rear. The situation was hopeless. Knowing that the end was near, Leonidas gathered his men. He dismissed the bulk of the Greek allies, commanding them to flee and fight another day. But the Spartans, the Thespians, and a handful of others chose to remain. For them, retreat was unthinkable. They would make their stand here, to the last man. The final assault began. Surrounded on all sides, the Greeks fought with the desperation of men who know they are doomed. Their spears broke, their shields splintered, but they fought on with swords, with daggers, with their bare hands. Leonidas himself fell, pierced by Persian arrows, but the Spartans fought to recover his body, refusing to let it fall into enemy hands. At last, overwhelmed by sheer force of numbers, the defenders were cut down. The Persian victory was complete, but it had come at terrible cost. Thousands of Persians lay dead, their blood soaking the earth of Thermopylae. The courage of the Spartans and their allies became legend. The sacrifice at Thermopylae sent a message to all of Greece that free men would fight, even against impossible odds, rather than submit to tyranny. News of Leonidas and his 300 spread like wildfire. Inspired by their example, the Greek city-states united. At Salamis, the Greek navy dealt the Persians a crushing blow. At Plataea, a year later, the Persians were finally driven from Greece. Leonidas did not live to see the ultimate victory. His body was left at Thermopylae for a time, mutilated by the Persians in a vain attempt to erase his glory. But the Greeks later returned, recovered his remains, and buried him in Sparta, where a simple epitaph marked his grave. Centuries later, a stone would be set at Thermopylae, inscribed with words that have become immortal. Go tell the Spartans, stranger passing by, that here, obedient to their laws, we lie. The tale of Leonidas and the defense of Thermopylae has been retold for generations. It is not just a story of battle, but of ideals, of duty, sacrifice, and the unyielding resolve of those who would rather die as free men than live as slaves. In the face of overwhelming power, the Spartans did not falter. They stood, as Leonidas commanded, holding the pass for 3 days against the mightiest army the world had ever seen. The story endures not because it was a victory. Indeed, Thermopylae was a tactical defeat, but it was a victory of spirit, a demonstration that courage and unity can inspire nations, can turn the tide of history. Leonidas, the king who led by example, became a symbol for all people who face darkness with defiance and hope. Through the ages, the legacy of Thermopylae has inspired poets, soldiers, and leaders. The names of Leonidas and his 300 are remembered wherever men and women value freedom. Their stand reminds us that sometimes the greatest triumphs come not from winning, but from refusing to surrender, from holding fast to honor, even when the world seems lost. So, in the quiet moments before dawn, when the world holds its breath, remember Thermopylae. Remember the hot gates, where a handful of men stood against an empire. Remember Leonidas, the king who chose death over dishonor, who led his men not just into battle, but into legend. For as long as courage is cherished and liberty is prized, the story of Leonidas and the Battle of Thermopylae will be told anew, a beacon of hope, a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit.